Let's get started. Now, today's agenda has two components. I want to help you align your resume's format with how recruiters actually scan and read resumes, and I'd like you to learn how to identify techniques to improve both clarity and the impact of each bullet. Now remember, your resume is a self-promotional marketing tool, but many people underutilize this tool by merely writing a summary of their work experiences instead. Now, I developed this construct for my own clients who needed their own resumes revamped, and I discovered the power of looking at different paradigms and trying to apply them to resume building. So looking at an issue from an entirely new perspective reveals many solutions that you might not otherwise think of. Now, nimble people see parallels between analogies, and other people, perhaps they just see differences. And I was inspired by the analogy that the Wright brothers made. For centuries, people were trying to create flight. But the Wright brothers, they asked the question, is an airplane analogous to a bird or a bicycle? And everyone else thought it was analogous to a bird. But the Wright brothers saw an analogy to the machine they were already designing, because remember, they designed bicycles. So because they shifted the analogy, it really opened up all new solutions. Both the bicycle and the airplane they were trying to develop, they were both unstable vehicles requiring nuanced balance in a three-dimensional space. Both fell if they lost too much momentum, or they fell if they had too little. So how powerful is the right analogy? Well, in this example, centuries of potential aviators modeled their machines after birds, but the Wright brothers discovered that flapping wings was superfluous to the intrinsic aerodynamics of flight. It merely reflected propulsion unique to birds. And so, for our topic, I said, how can I serve my own clients better? Well, the parallel that I see is between a professional resume writer, myself, and a real estate broker. And looking at it through this perspective opened up a whole new way of creating resumes. Now, recruiters spend an average of 6 seconds per resume before segmenting it either into the long list to look at later or the trash bin. An unsolicited resume gets an average of a 6-second scan. So, to use our old SAT analogies, for sales to job search, as sold is to hire. And then the next analogy I looked at for not the entire resume on a macro level, but to each individual bullet on a micro level, I looked at the parallel between each resume's bullet and the casting of a movie. For example, we have 3 actors. We have Joel Murray, Brian Murray, and Bill Murray. Now, we have character actors and leading actors. Now, producers of movies, they market the movie against their leading actor. Leading actors, once signed on, attract even more investors, and further, they could further the hiring list and hire additional character actors. Supporting actors support the movie, but they do not lead the marketing strategy. So I applied this parallel to each resume. Now, the main mistake that I've seen among my clients is that they create the bullets from their job description, but this approach does not include the very information that your potential employer seeks. Merely saying what you did from your job description does not say if you did it well, and even if you did do it well, it does not even say if it was beneficial to the company or how beneficial it was. So remember, every job exists because it has, at the very least, an indirect relationship to net income or profit. Otherwise, the job never would have been created in the first place. So when we look at an individual bullet, we might ask the question, if your boss were to take credit for the task, how would he or she describe it? This elevates the bullet up an entire level. And also with each bullet, we can ask the additional question, why did your company pay you to perform that task? Here we're focusing on the benefit of what you did as opposed to what you did being pulled from the job description. So your resume, your neighborhood, let's continue. I see your resume as if I were a real estate broker viewing a neighborhood. Now, in a neighborhood, some parts of the neighborhood are more expensive than others. So the most expensive part of your resume is the top, and the most to the least expensive part of every bullet is left to right. Recruiters read from top down, and they read from left to right. Now, as they get to the middle of the bullet, studies have shown that several words in, they go from reading to scanning mode. Now, recruiters search resumes to exclude resumes to work with the ones that are left. So when they're looking at a resume, they're looking at quick time-to-market reasons to exclude resumes. So we might think being able to apply to 10, 20 jobs in 10 minutes on Indeed is good, but actually 20, 30 years ago when we had to write our resumes on a Smith Corona typewriter, mail it, get a stamp, go to the post office, a job might receive 200 resumes, and most of them might be pretty decent. Otherwise, people would not spend that much time getting the resume to the employer. But because we could just click a mouse, often people apply to jobs without reading the job descriptions. They may or may not even have the work authorization to work in the respective country for the job they're applying to. So it's so many resumes coming in. Recruiters are just looking for anything to exclude, and then perhaps when they have 100, they'll start working with that list. Now, most HR compensation plans incentivize recruiters to hire good enough and not the best. And I'll give you an example, and this really plays into how we want to construct the resume. I say that many recruiters are paid to hire good enough because they're measured on how many vacancies are filled or how many vacancies are still open after 30 days. That would be an adverse thing. And they're measured on time to hire. But let's say that someone was hired and 5 to 7 years later they wind up doing something extraordinary to save the company, or perhaps they get promoted up the rank, up to CEO. Well, when I construct compensation plans, I make sure 7 years later who was the recruiter that hired that person, because that should also impact his or her bonus. But very few companies really ask who recruited this person 1, 2, 3, 4 years out. So because of that, recruiters are under a lot of pressure to hire good enough. But if they knew that they were incentivized, that they could even receive compensation many years later, you know, for example, I like when companies look at performance ratings, and for the group of employees that receive the top ratings, let's find out who the recruiters were so we could incentivize them. But this is not what most companies do, so we have to realize that recruiters are incentivized to hire good enough. Why do they do this? Well, I believe that they're really acting in enlightened self-interest. HR really needs to incentivize the behavior that they want to promote, and this is not always happening with recruiters. Now, the other component of a resume is this ratio. I want you to think of a ratio of content divided by words. For your resume, we want this ratio to be as high as possible and absolutely greater than 1. Now, this is a qualitative description, but I've never seen a client's resume that I was not able to at least get rid of a third to a half of the content in a bullet, to get rid of perhaps half the words without diminishing what the bullet was trying to say. We want to avoid, to draw the analogy to quantitative easing, monetary policies, we want to avoid the illustration of printing money, which makes every dollar worth less. So every time we add words to a bullet, the gravitas of each word is less. The recruiter is going to switch from reading to scanning mode that much sooner. And in our neighborhood analogy, the less units in a building, the more expensive each unit in that building is, through the theory of scarcity. So let's think of words as something that we want to really treasure. Now, when a movie is pitched in Hollywood, we often hear picture the one sheet. When they're trying to get a movie developed, they describe what the movie poster will look like. Well, in this movie, we could tell that the person who's leading the marketing efforts is Meryl Streep. And the two other stars are very important to the movie, but there was a decision that marketing-wise that the star of this movie will be Meryl Streep. And we could see because she is in the center of the poster, and that's where the eye is naturally joined. In this movie, Groundhog Day, we could see that not Andie MacDowell, but Bill Murray is really leading the marketing effort. So when we look at an individual bullet, we want to make sure that we start with our leading person, our leading actor. We want to make sure that we start with Bill Murray. Now, when we look at the way Hollywood constructs a story, they have the exposition, the tension, the climax, and the resolution. Well, for a bullet, I flip it. We start with the resolution because we immediately want to grab the attention. This is the benefit of what I did in this bullet. Then we explain a little bit how it was done. So let's give a more detailed example. If we take the way movies are constructed, the narrative line, and reverse it, and we start with resolution, tension, then exposition, well, our bullet should lead with results, then what was the issue, and then maybe a bit of detail for context. So the result might be improved revenue by 40%. Let's just start with that. And then the issue might be through developing better time-to-market apps that our salesmen could use on the field. So we want to start with Bill Murray, and then perhaps you have Joel Murray, and then Brian Murray. Now here are some examples. A client might write, I consolidated 9 disparate databases across multiple legacy systems. Well, this bullet does not even say if you did it well. And even if you did it well, it does not even say how beneficial it was for the firm. So the Bill Murray is missing. So we go from consolidated 9 disparate databases to this new and improved bullet. Increased time to market to executive decision making by consolidating 9 disparate databases into a single instant, on time, on budget. We include the level of performance, and we also include the benefit to the firm. Another example, a client might write this bullet, and it's a bit awkward: manage and direct the day-to-day functionality of the inbound customer service department for e-commerce multi-website businesses. Well, the result is missing, the benefit is missing, and yes, there is context, but maybe a little bit too much context. And again, the recruiter does not even know if the person did it well or not. So we improved that bullet, and now it reads new and improved: increased first inbound call resolution by 35%, and increase quality insurance levels while reducing average call times through improved candidate screening and newly developed orientation training. Right? We start with the result, then we follow with the benefit, and then the context. So even if the recruiters switch from reading to scanning mode, they absolutely read the result, which is very impressive, right? We increased inbound call resolution by 35%. Then they're reading the benefits. So even if they switch to scanning mode, that is probably in the least expensive real estate of the bullet. Another example, here's a possible bullet: work with brass ring and compliance coordinators to credential and update candidate records, ensuring JACHO compliance. Well, it's leading with too much specificity. So when you have too much specificity, if that employer does not use that actual system, they will not imagine you in the job. But every boss emotionally identifies with financial results and company benefits, even if the system that you use differed. So we don't want to lead with the system, but we want to lead with the result. So for our bullets, we want concise language. Remember that ratio. Content, what you want to say, divided by words. We want that ratio to be as high as possible. We also want words to evoke a visceral, positive image, because at the end of the day, we are not algorithms. We're human beings making emotional decisions, no matter how hard we try to remove emotions from the equation. And we also want categories to be hierarchically consistent. So another bullet might be partnered with executives in Europe, US, Canada, and South America on transformational activities. Well, this bullet, we can improve it. It's too vague. Who did we partner with? What was the interaction? It's transformational, but how? What's the benefit? There's a mixture of countries and continents, so that's not consistent. And you can be concise with more words, right? It is possible to make it even more lengthy, but we could still improve that ratio because we're saying even more. So there's always a tension between vague and specificity, because the employer ultimately, whether they realize it or not, wants to imagine you, consciously or subconsciously. They'd like to imagine you in the job. So they want to see overlap between your resume and the job description. So listing specific proprietary systems or having a bullet with too much specificity can be a reason to exclude you. Because if you say, well, I worked on the ABC payroll system, a recruiter or an employee might say, well, we don't even use that system. Exclude this candidate. But if you say improve time to market to payroll by 30%, well, regardless of what system the employer uses, he or she could imagine that, hey, that's a benefit that I would want for myself. So all employees want increasing revenue, decreasing costs, increased efficiency, reduced cycle times. So these type of descriptions are powerful Bill Murray's, powerful ways to start the bullet, because regardless of the specificity of systems and the detail and the industry, all employers and companies can emotionally identify with these descriptions. Another example used ABC payroll to handle on and off cycle payments, research discrepancies, etc., etc. You could read the bullet on top. Well, all companies have payroll systems, but most likely not that specific ABC payroll system. And the bullet does not claim if the task was completed successfully or not. The wording might be a little bit clumsy and lacking structure, and the bullet also has a low empathy curve. It doesn't really connect the recruiter to the candidate. Where's your Bill Murray? Where's your Joe Murray? So let's look at the new improved bullet. Reduce payroll cycle time by 30% and increased accuracy by 15% by migrating from a legacy to a new off-the-shelf solution. This new and improved bullet has the result. It has 2 benefits, and we even have context. Now, a bullet should be a talking point for an interview and not include every detail. It is not a deep dive. It's meant to give structure to a conversation. So every company in this bullet, we can imagine, every company needs to increase payroll efficiencies, so this bullet has a visceral emotional link. Now, that's it for now, but I want to introduce additional techniques that we're not going to discuss in detail because it is beyond the scope of this webinar, but if people are interested, they could contact NetCom Learning. So there are 2 other advanced resume techniques that I do for certain clients. One is an infographic resume, more suitable for marketing and high-tech jobs, millennials working for millennials, or anyone simply wishing to stand out from the crowd. And then a little bit more conservative would be a hybrid resume, in which the first third of the first page is an executive summary of the entire resume, taking into account that people do read from top to bottom, and the most expensive real estate on the resume is that top third. So we're just giving some examples of an infographic resume. See, we just see generic examples, and you can investigate this on your own. Contact NetCom Learning, but you see there are various ways, and it's a very avant-garde way of doing a resume, and it may not be suited for more traditional industries. Now, a little bit more conservative would be the hybrid approach, in which we start with the branding statement, areas of expertise in a grid, and then your 5 best accomplishments, which will be included in more detail at the bottom of your resume, which will follow the more traditional approach. But remember, the most awesome things that you are doing or have done may not be in your current job. So this is a wonderful way to get bragging rights to the top 5 things that you've done, regardless of when you did them. And then we continue with the additional resume. So thank you very much. I hope you join us for our next webinar, the Ethics Lecture on August 25th. And deployed correctly, we say that using ethics can actually be a competitive advantage for you being interviewed and for your company's bottom line. I hope you join us on August 25th at 1 p.m. and I thank you all for your time today.
Is it worth having a qualification section at the top of your resume?
Instead of, you would put that in the most expensive part of your resume in the branding statement. You know, for example, if you went to a phenomenal university, yes, the details of your education will be on the bottom. Your credentialing will be on the bottom, but in the branding statement, you could say, you know, Harvard graduate or CPA or certified professional. So I believe that if the certification is really an endemic part of your profession, then you should lead with that. But instead of leading by putting all of your credentialings on top, no, the credentialings stay towards the bottom. But that's what I would want you to work into your branding statement. Or for your selected accomplishments, you can include recently received certification in fill in the blank. So you'd want to work it up into the top, but maybe include the bulk of the details on the bottom.
Okay, another question for you, Vincent. How do you approach those of us with broad experience but on the wrong side of the mountain?
I believe that the wrong side of the mountain, there is no wrong side of the mountain, and I'll tell you why I think that. even business is not about as soon as things are advantageous, I'm going to do this. Success on a personal level or a business level is this. This is where I am. And wherever you are at this moment is perfect. This is where you are. How do you leverage where you are? So the mere fact that we're pointing at the wrong side of the mountain is a pessimistic way of looking at it, and that will permeate how the bullet will come out. So I really encourage you, something I really believe passionately, that get rid of negative wording, because your subconscious mind is the supercomputer. Your conscious mind is just a Post-it note. There are ways to identify transferable skills. In fact, there are many people who are career changers, and what I often do is say this person has a competitive advantage over the non-career changers, because they've been learning it the standard or the incorrect way for all these years, but this person has brought over all of these transferable skills. So the key is transferable skills, and also the key is to continue learning. One way to develop core competencies in something is simply by reading everything you can get your hands on. I often, when I work with clients, I put them in fields that are in high demand, short supply. By the time a university offers a degree in something, it's no longer a competitive advantage because it's now very common. So for example, 10 years ago, I was putting people in big data. No one was talking about big data 10 years ago, and the way to develop expertise in that matter a decade ago was to read everything you can get your hands on, information, interviews, networking, and so people would put developing core competencies in big data. So there's also a lot of learning on your own.
Okay, next question. Should you have a different keyword-specific resume when you submit to an ATS as opposed to a recruiter?
Well, I believe if it's very obvious that the recruiter sees that you do have two entirely different resumes around, that would hurt our credibility. It's acceptable that if you're a payroll specialist and you happen to know PeopleSoft very well and you're applying for a job for a company that uses PeopleSoft, you may want to change payroll to PeopleSoft. So tweaks is acceptable, but if there's a wide gap between your two versions of the resume, the recruiter may challenge the credibility of that. One way to get past these hurdles is really networking. Many jobs, by the time they're posted, the employer already knows who they want to hire through networking. So a lot of these jobs are already hardwired, but companies may have a policy where they have to interview at least 3 people. But companies are so much more comfortable hiring people who they're networked with because they have already been vetted and vouched for. So instead of just trying to get through the hurdle, submitting a resume through Indeed, focus on networking. And that's a separate webinar that we can do in the future. But instead of looking for a job, look for professional relationships. And that's the best long-term investment you can, so your resume is hand-delivered instead of going through an applicant tracking system.
Okay, Vincent, another question. This is from Marcy. She would like to know, can you give an example of a branding statement?
Yes, I can. I'm working on it now with clients. A branding statement, let me tell you what you want to consider because I don't have one in front of me. But a branding statement, you want to figure out what is your philosophy on the world, on business, what is your target audience. So it might be HR professional with Revamp credentials from New York University, 10 years experience in Comp and Ben, bilingual, bicultural, with financial knowledge. That would be an example of a branding statement. A branding statement is written as if it were the headlines of a newspaper, very staccato. We're not using full sentences. And the reason why I have my clients develop branding statements, and we spend quite a bit of time on it, because a branding statement is one of those wonderful things that's included on the top of a resume, in a LinkedIn profile, expanded into full sentences into your cover letter, into your elevator pitch, and into your bio, as a way people would introduce you if you're ever on an industry panel. So this one branding statement has 6 different purposes that we just mentioned. So if you reach out, we can go into more detail, but It's one of the most powerful things you could do. It's really the executive summary of the executive summary of the resume. It's the totality of you in 45 seconds or less. I hope that helps.
Okay, we have time for one last question. This is a good one. I have 25 plus years of experience. Is it important that I keep the resume length less than 2 pages?
No. Sometimes I even get a question from millennials saying my resume should not go over 1 page, and I say, wait, what does 1 page mean anymore? We're uploading our resumes to Taleo. They're being scrolled on an iPad. So the whole idea of 1 versus 2 pages today, when resumes are being uploaded in applicant tracking systems or being scrolled down computer screens, does not have the same meaning as 1 or 2 pages many years ago. And I'll tell you this, why it's okay to go over 2 pages. No employer was ever thrilled to death over someone's resume, and they figured that this person was perfect for the job, and then they discovered that because the resume went to 3 pages, they went, ah, too bad. I wanted to hire this person. Too bad he or she went to 3 pages. No, no employer ever said that. But if you do not grab their attention on the first page, I also guarantee they will not even look at the second page. But if they are thoroughly impressed with the candidate, a company will never shortchange themselves simply excluding the candidate for no other reason that they happen to go over 3 pages. If you've grabbed them on the first page, they're probably going to want to look at all 3 pages. And with 25 years experience, I think it's expected that you're going to go over 2 pages. Mine certainly does. I am a polymath and I'm involved in so many different things. I would have a very difficult time truthfully representing myself in only 2 pages. So I believe it's perfectly okay, provided you pay attention to that ratio. What do you want to say divided by the number of words? Because remember, you could be wordy on 1 page and very concise with 3 pages. Just make sure that who's ever reading your resume is getting good bang for the buck, that even those 3 pages, what you say really counts.